Adelaide Thompson stood before CNN cameras 24 hours after the incident, gripping a thick folder of documents against Sky National Airlines, America's third-largest carrier. The reporter asked how she felt being discriminated against right before her career's most important testimony. Adelaide smiled coldly, declaring they had chosen the wrong person to stop. The camera cut back 24 hours to Atlanta Airport, Gate D27, where everything began with one simple refusal that changed absolutely everything. Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from right now. If you believe standing up against injustice matters, smash that like button. Subscribe and hit the notification bell because stories like this need to be heard. Trust me, what happens next will leave you absolutely speechless. Now, let's go back to where it all started. That morning began like any other successful day in the Thompson household. Adelaide Thompson, 42 years old, had built her reputation as one of the nation's most formidable civil rights attorneys over 18 years of relentless advocacy. She had won landmark cases against corporations, police departments, and government agencies. But nothing in her career compared to what she was preparing for that Tuesday morning. In exactly 20 hours, she would stand before the Senate Committee on Civil Rights to deliver testimony about systematic racial discrimination practices in American aviation. Her briefcase contained 2 years of investigation, 312 witness statements, and statistical evidence proving black passengers were refused boarding at 3 times the rate of white passengers on Sky National Airlines flights. The data was irrefutable. The patterns were undeniable. And tomorrow, the world would know. Her husband Bernard, a cardiovascular surgeon at Emory University Hospital, emerged from their bedroom carrying their daughter Ada's backpack. At 45, Bernard had performed over 2,000 heart surgeries and saved countless lives, yet he still got nervous when his family flew. Not because of turbulence or mechanical failures, but because of moments like the one they were about to experience. Their son Aaron, 14 years old and already standing 6 feet tall, was checking his phone while their 12-year-old daughter Ada practiced a piano piece on her tablet with headphones. They were the picture of an accomplished black American family. Bernard held 2 medical degrees. Adelaide had graduated top of her class from Yale Law School. Their children attended private school and spoke 3 languages between them. They dressed impeccably, carried themselves with quiet confidence, and had flown first class or business class dozens of times without incident. The family departed their Buckhead home at 3:15 in the afternoon for a 6 o'clock evening flight to Reagan National Airport in Washington. Adelaide had booked their business class tickets 3 months earlier, confirmed them twice, and even called the airline the previous week to verify everything was perfect. She could not be late. The Senate hearing began at 9 o'clock sharp the next morning, and she was the lead witness. Dozens of families were counting on her testimony to finally expose the systemic racism they had endured. As Bernard drove their Mercedes toward Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Adelaide reviewed her notes one final time. She had memorized every statistic, every case study, every damning piece of evidence. She was ready for battle. What she did not know was that the battle would begin much sooner than expected, and in a place she never anticipated. They arrived at the airport at 4 o'clock, 2 hours before departure as recommended. Check-in went smoothly. The Sky National agent at the counter smiled professionally, printed their boarding passes, and tagged their luggage without any issues. Security screening was equally uneventful. Adelaide's legal documents were examined and returned. Bernard's medical bag was swabbed and cleared. The children passed through the metal detector without triggering any alarms. By 4:45, they were walking through the bright corridors toward Gate D27 in Terminal D. Adelaide felt a flutter of anticipation. In less than 24 hours, she would be changing history. But as they approached Gate D27, she noticed something that made her instincts prickle with warning. The gate agent, a white man in his mid-30s with close-cropped hair and a rigid posture, was watching them approach with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite neutral. It was the look Adelaide had seen countless times in her career, the look people gave when they had already made a judgment before knowing any facts. She squeezed Bernard's hand briefly, a silent signal they had developed over 20 years of marriage. Stay alert. Something might be wrong. Gate D27 hummed with the usual pre-boarding activity. Passengers lined up with carry-on bags, children fidgeted in their seats, and departure announcements echoed through the terminal. Adelaide Thompson approached the podium where Garrett Mitchell, the gate agent, stood typing on his computer. She handed over their 4 boarding passes with a polite smile. Garrett scanned the first pass. The machine beeped red. He frowned, scanned it again. Another red beep. He looked up at Adelaide with an expression that seemed almost satisfied, as if he had been expecting this exact outcome. "There's a problem with your tickets," he announced loudly enough that several nearby passengers turned to look. Adelaide kept her voice calm and professional. "That's strange. We booked these tickets 3 months ago and received confirmation twice. What kind of problem?" Garrett did not meet her eyes. Instead, he stared at his computer screen and repeated mechanically, "The system is showing an issue with your reservation. I need to verify some things." Bernard stepped forward, pulling out his phone. "Here's our confirmation email from March 15th. Reservation number SN847KL. Business class, 4 passengers, confirmed and paid in full." He held the phone toward Garrett, who glanced at it for less than 2 seconds before returning his attention to the computer. "I still need to verify through our system," Garrett said flatly. Behind them, a white couple in their 60s approached the gate. Garrett immediately smiled at them, scanned their boarding passes, and they beeped green without any issue. "Have a wonderful flight," he told them warmly. They walked down the jetway within 30 seconds. Another family, white with 3 young children, came next. Scan, beep, smile, welcome aboard. The entire process took less than a minute. Adelaide felt her jaw tighten. This was not a technical issue. This was something else entirely. Aaron leaned close to his mother and whispered, "Mom, why are they letting everyone else on but not us?" Adelaide touched her son's shoulder gently. "Hush now. Let me handle this." She turned back to Garrett, maintaining her composure despite the anger building in her chest. "Sir, I'm watching you process other passengers in seconds while we've been standing here for 5 minutes. Can you please explain specifically what the issue is with our reservation?" Garrett's expression hardened. "Ma'am, I've already told you. There's a system issue. I've called my supervisor. You'll need to wait." He picked up a phone and spoke quietly into it, his eyes never leaving Adelaide's face. It was a look of challenge, almost daring her to make a scene. 5 minutes became 10. More passengers streamed past them, all being processed smoothly. A businessman with a first-class ticket. A young couple holding hands. An elderly woman with a cane. White, white, white. All cleared within moments. The Thompson family remained at the podium, their presence becoming a spectacle. Ada tugged on her father's sleeve. "Dad, are we going to miss our plane?" Bernard crouched down to his daughter's eye level. "No, sweetheart. This is just a small delay. Everything will be fine." But his voice carried uncertainty he could not quite hide. Adelaide made a decision. She pulled out her phone and began recording video. The moment Garrett saw the camera pointed at him, his demeanor shifted from coldly professional to openly hostile. "Ma'am, you need to put that phone away right now," he demanded. Adelaide kept recording. "I'm in a public space at a public airport. I have every legal right to document this interaction. Unless you'd like to tell me which law I'm violating." Garrett's face flushed red. He jabbed at his phone again, speaking more urgently this time. Adelaide continued filming, making sure to capture the stream of white passengers being processed efficiently while her family stood segregated at the podium like criminals awaiting judgment. Around them, other travelers began to notice. Some looked uncomfortable. Others stared openly. A few pulled out their own phones. The situation was escalating, and Adelaide knew from experience that escalation could go in one of two directions. Either someone in authority would intervene and resolve this reasonably, or it would get much, much worse. Within 3 minutes, she had her answer. A woman in her early 50s with steel-gray hair and a Sky National supervisor badge approached with the expression of someone who had already decided the outcome before hearing any facts. Adelaide recognized that look too. This was about to get worse. Geneva Walsh strode toward gate D27 with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her entire 12-year career with Sky National Airlines. Her supervisor badge gleamed under the fluorescent terminal lights. She did not greet the Thompson family. She did not ask what the problem was. She simply positioned herself next to Garrett Mitchell and announced in a voice designed to carry across the entire gate area, "This family is being flagged for suspicious behavior and will need to undergo additional screening before being permitted to board." The words hit Adelaide like a physical blow. Suspicious behavior. It was the catch-all phrase, the magic words that turned ordinary citizens into suspects without requiring any actual evidence or justification. Adelaide felt every eye in the gate area turn toward her family. She saw the judgment forming on faces, the instinctive assumption that if an airline official said they were suspicious, they must have done something wrong. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm despite the humiliation burning through her veins. "Excuse me," Adelaide said, her attorney voice emerging with crystalline clarity. "Can you please specify exactly what suspicious behavior you're referring to?" "We checked in normally, passed through TSA security without any issues, and have been waiting patiently while other passengers have been processed. What specifically has flagged us as suspicious?" Geneva's lips pressed into a thin line. "We've received reports from other passengers about concerning conduct." Adelaide's eyebrows rose. "What reports? From which passengers? What specific conduct?" Geneva crossed her arms. "That information is confidential for security purposes. What I can tell you is that you'll need to come with me for additional verification before you'll be permitted to board this aircraft." Bernard, who rarely raised his voice even in the operating room when lives hung in the balance, stepped forward with his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Ma'am, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. My wife and I are both professionals. I'm a cardiac surgeon at Emory. She's an attorney. We've been flying with Sky National for over 15 years. We've never had any kind of incident or complaint. Our children are 12 and 14 years old. We're traveling to Washington for important business. Whatever information you think you have, I assure you it's incorrect." Geneva's expression did not soften even slightly. "Sir, I don't care what your professions are. I'm following security protocols. If you refuse to cooperate, that will be noted and may result in you being denied boarding entirely." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Adelaide felt Aaron tense beside her, felt Ada's small hand grip her own more tightly. Her children were watching their parents, two highly educated and accomplished professionals, being treated like criminals for absolutely no reason. This was the moment Adelaide had spent her entire career fighting against, and now it was happening to her own family. A voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, but I've been standing here the whole time and I haven't seen this family do anything even remotely suspicious." The speaker was a white woman in her early 60s, wearing a cardigan and sensible shoes, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her name tag read Helen. She stepped forward from where she had been waiting to board. "I watched them arrive. They were polite and calm. The only issue has been the gate agent refusing to process their tickets while everyone else was allowed to board immediately. If anyone should be questioned, it should be about why this family is being singled out." Geneva turned her cold gaze on Helen. "Ma'am, unless you're a Sky National employee or security personnel, I need you to step back and mind your own business." Helen did not move. I'm a paying passenger who is about to board a flight operated by your airline. That makes this very much my business, especially when I'm witnessing what appears to be blatant racial discrimination. Other passengers began murmuring. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The gate area was transforming into a pressure cooker of tension and judgment. Geneva's jaw clenched. She turned back to Adelaide. You have two options. Come with me now for additional screening, or refuse and be denied boarding. You have 30 seconds to decide. Adelaide looked at her watch. It was 5:30. Boarding would close at 5:50. If they went with Geneva for additional screening, there was no guarantee they would be cleared in time. If they refused, they would definitely miss the flight. Either way, Geneva had engineered a situation where the Thompson family would not be getting on that airplane. Adelaide felt the fury rising in her throat, threatening to explode, but she swallowed it down. Not here. Not now. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. Instead, she looked directly at Geneva and said quietly, "You're making the biggest mistake of your career right now. I want your name, your employee number, and the name of every person who has been involved in this decision. I'm going to remember this moment for the rest of my life." Geneva smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who believed they held all the power and faced no consequences. "You're welcome to file a complaint through our website. Now, are you coming with me or refusing screening?" Before Adelaide could answer, Geneva raised her hand and made a signal. 2 airport security officers appeared, materializing from somewhere in the terminal. One was a white man named Dale, stocky and stern-faced. The other was a Latino man named Roberto, younger and looking distinctly uncomfortable with whatever he had been called to do. Dale approached first. "What's the situation here?" Geneva gestured at the Thompson family as if they were exhibits in a museum. "These passengers are refusing to comply with security screening procedures. They may need to be escorted from the gate area." It was a lie, blatant and bold. Adelaide had never refused anything. She had simply asked questions, which was apparently a crime when you were black and trying to board an airplane. The gate agent had closed off their jetway. Through the window, Adelaide could see the aircraft, could see flight attendants moving inside, could see the dream of making it to Washington slipping away with every passing second. And standing there, surrounded by security officers and judgmental stares, watching her children's faces fill with confusion and fear, Adelaide Thompson understood with perfect clarity that this was not an accident or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. This was calculated. And this was about to become the fight of her life. Dale positioned himself slightly in front of Adelaide, his hand resting on his belt near his radio. His presence was meant to intimidate, and he made no effort to hide it. "Folks, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. You're being asked to comply with standard security procedures. Are you going to cooperate or do we have a problem?" Roberto stood a few feet back, his eyes moving between the Thompson family and his partner. Adelaide could see the conflict written across his younger face. He knew something was wrong here. He could sense the injustice unfolding. But he was also an employee with a job to protect, and speaking up meant risking everything. Adelaide understood that calculation intimately. She had seen it play out in courtrooms and depositions and police stations for nearly 2 decades. Good people staying silent because the cost of speaking up seemed too high. Bernard moved protectively closer to his children. His voice remained steady but carried an edge Adelaide rarely heard. "Officer, we haven't refused anything. We've asked for clarification about why we're being treated differently than every other passenger at this gate. That's not refusal. That's requesting information we have a right to receive." Dale's expression did not change. "Sir, I'm not here to debate airline policies. I'm here because you've been identified as potentially disruptive passengers. Now you can either go with the supervisor for additional screening or you can leave the gate area entirely." Those are your two choices. The word potentially hung in the air like an accusation. Not actually disruptive. Not proven to be disruptive. Just potentially, which meant nothing and everything at the same time. It was the language of preemptive punishment, of guilty until proven innocent, of your blackness is suspicious enough. Aaron spoke up for the first time, his 14-year-old voice cracking with emotion. We didn't do anything wrong. Why are you treating us like criminals? Dale looked at the teenager with something that might have been sympathy but was more likely annoyance at having his authority questioned by a child. Son, nobody's treating you like a criminal. We're just following procedures. Aaron's hands balled into fists at his sides. You're not following procedures with anyone else. Just us. Why is that? Adelaide put a hand on her son's shoulder. Aaron, quiet now. But she was proud of him for asking the question that needed to be asked. Her son was learning in real time what it meant to be black in America, learning that excellence in education and good behavior meant nothing when someone in power had already decided you were a threat. It was a lesson she had hoped to delay for a few more years, but life did not care about her preferences. Geneva checked her watch with theatrical precision. It's 5:45. The flight begins final boarding in 5 minutes. Are you coming with me or not? Adelaide looked at the clock, calculating desperately. Even if they went with Geneva right now, even if the screening took only 10 minutes, they would miss the boarding window. Geneva knew this. She had engineered this exact scenario. The question was whether Adelaide should comply and miss the flight anyway, or refuse and have it on record that she was uncooperative, which would be used against her later. It was a trap with no good exit. She thought about the Senate hearing. She thought about the 312 families waiting for her testimony. She thought about the 2 years of work that would be undermined if she was not in that hearing room tomorrow morning. The next flight was not until 6 o'clock the following morning, which would land her in Washington at 7:30, giving her barely 90 minutes to reach the Capitol before the hearing began. It was cutting it impossibly close. But more than the logistics, she thought about what this moment represented. This was not just about one flight or one family. This was about a system that felt entitled to humiliate and obstruct black people without cause or consequence. Now let me ask you something, and I really want to hear your thoughts on this. If you were in Adelaide's position right now, watching your children's faces, knowing your career-defining moment is slipping away, feeling the weight of hundreds of families counting on you, what would you do? Would you comply to avoid escalation, or would you stand your ground and demand accountability? Comment number 1 if you think she should comply and try to catch the next flight. Comment number 2 if you think she should refuse and force them to either let her board or officially deny her. And if you've ever experienced something like this yourself, or witnessed discrimination that made you feel powerless, share your story in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe no family should ever be treated this way. Subscribe because this story is about to take a turn that will restore your faith in justice. So what does Adelaide choose? Does she back down, or does she make a decision that will change everything? Keep watching. Adelaide made her choice. She looked directly into Geneva's eyes and spoke clearly enough for everyone in the gate area to hear. I want to state for the record, in front of all these witnesses, that my family has not engaged in any suspicious behavior. We have not refused any legitimate security procedures. We checked in properly, passed TSA screening, and have been waiting to board like every other passenger. The only difference is our race. I am documenting this interaction, and I will be filing formal complaints with Sky National, the Department of Transportation, and the Federal Aviation Administration regarding this discriminatory treatment. I am also requesting the names and employee identification numbers of everyone involved in this decision. Geneva's face flushed red. You can request whatever you want. File your complaints online like everyone else. Last chance. Screening or departure? Adelaide's phone was still recording. I am willing to undergo any screening that is applied equally to all passengers. But I will not be singled out based on my race while white passengers are processed normally. That is illegal under the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Air Carrier Access Act. The legal citations hung in the air. Geneva's eyes narrowed slightly. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Who was this woman who knew federal transportation law off the top of her head? But the moment passed quickly, replaced by rigid determination. Geneva had committed to a course of action and could not back down without losing face. Final boarding call for Sky National Flight 847 to Washington Reagan, the gate announcement crackled overhead. Geneva held Adelaide's gaze for a long moment, then turned to Garrett. Close the door. Deny boarding for these 4 passengers. Garrett's fingers moved across his keyboard. The jetway door began to swing closed. Through the window, Adelaide watched the aircraft that should have carried her to the most important day of her career begin the final preparations for pushback. Bernard's hand found hers and squeezed tight. Ada buried her face in her father's side. Aaron stood rigid, his jaw clenched, holding back tears of frustration and rage. Around them, other passengers stared with expressions ranging from sympathy to discomfort to satisfaction. The door sealed shut with a hydraulic hiss. The Thompson family stood there, boarding passes in hand, watching their flight prepare to leave without them. Helen, the white woman who had spoken up earlier, approached Adelaide quietly. I recorded the whole thing on my phone. If you need a witness, I'll testify to exactly what happened here. Adelaide nodded, not trusting herself to speak without her voice breaking. Geneva turned on her heel and walked away without another word, her job apparently done. Dale and Roberto lingered awkwardly. Roberto looked like he wanted to say something, his mouth opening and closing, but ultimately he remained silent. Dale cleared his throat. You folks need to clear the gate area now. The situation is resolved. Resolved. As if denial of service and public humiliation could be filed away as a simple resolution. Adelaide gathered her family, her hands shaking with suppressed fury. They walked away from gate D27 with their luggage, for successful, educated, innocent people who had just been denied their basic rights in front of dozens of witnesses. Behind them, the plane began to taxi away from the gate, carrying passengers who had been deemed worthy of service. The Thompson family had been left behind. But Geneva Walsh, Garrett Mitchell, and Sky National Airlines had made one catastrophic miscalculation. They had chosen the wrong family to humiliate. And in approximately 12 hours, they would begin to understand exactly how wrong they had been. Adelaide Thompson did not cry. She had learned decades ago that tears were a luxury black women could rarely afford, especially when fighting for justice. Instead, she walked her family to a quiet corner of the terminal, sat her children down, and began making phone calls that would set in motion a chain of events no one at Sky National could have anticipated. Her first call was to Iris Hayes, her senior legal associate, a sharp-minded young attorney who had been helping prepare the Senate testimony. Iris answered on the second ring. Adelaide? How was the flight? Are you in D.C. already? Adelaide's voice came out harder than she intended. Iris, we never made it on the plane. Sky National refused to let us board. No legitimate reason. It was racial discrimination, clear and obvious, and it happened exactly 20 hours before I'm supposed to testify against them. The silence on the other end lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Iris's voice exploded. They did what? Are you serious? Do they not know who you are? Do they not understand you're literally testifying about their discrimination tomorrow? Adelaide felt a grim smile tug at her lips despite everything. Oh, I don't think the gate agents knew. But that's about to become their problem, not ours. Here's what I need you to do. Contact Senator Powell's office immediately. Explain the situation. Tell them I'll be on the first flight out tomorrow morning but it lands at 7:30, so I'll be cutting it extremely close. Send them everything we have, every document, every witness statement, every statistical analysis. Make sure they understand what just happened is a real-time example of exactly what I was coming to testify about. Iris was already typing in the background. On it. What else? Adelaide thought fast. Contact our media list. Every reporter we've worked with. Send them a brief statement that I was denied boarding by Sky National less than 24 hours before testifying about their discriminatory practices. Don't editorialize, just state the facts. Let them draw their own conclusions. And Iris? Start drafting a federal lawsuit. Violation of the Civil Rights Act, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and anything else you can think of. We're going to make them wish they had let us on that plane. While Adelaide worked the legal angles, Helen, the woman who had defended them at the gate, was sitting in seat 12A aboard the very flight the Thompsons had been denied. She pulled out her phone, opened Twitter, and began typing. Her fingers moved with purpose, driven by the righteous anger of someone who had finally seen clearly what many people never wanted to acknowledge. I just witnessed Sky National Airlines forcibly deny boarding to a black family for absolutely no reason. The gate agent processed dozens of white passengers normally but flagged this family as suspicious despite them having done nothing wrong. The mother is attorney Adelaide Thompson, who is literally scheduled to testify before the Senate tomorrow about racial discrimination in airlines. They tried to stop her from getting to that hearing. This is what systemic racism looks like. She attached the video she had recorded, 17 minutes of crystal clear footage showing the entire confrontation. She included shots of white passengers being processed smoothly, Geneva's hostile confrontation, the security officers, and the final denial. Then she tagged every major news outlet she could think of, added hashtags including Sky National Racism, Justice for the Thompsons, and Airline Discrimination, and hit post. The response was instantaneous. Within 15 minutes, the tweet had 300 retweets. Within 30 minutes, 2,000. Within an hour, the video had been viewed 28,000 times. Journalists began reaching out to Helen for interviews. Civil rights organizations started sharing the footage with commentary. Other passengers who had been on flights or worked for Sky National began flooding social media with their own stories of discrimination. A pattern emerged, damning and undeniable. Black passengers being randomly selected for extra screening at rates far exceeding statistical probability. Black families being separated and questioned while white families passed through untouched. Black business travelers in first class being asked to prove they had paid for their tickets while white passengers in identical seats were never questioned. Professional black women being told their natural hair was suspicious and required additional inspection. The stories poured in like water through a broken dam, each one another piece of evidence in a case that was building itself in real time across the internet. By 6:30 that evening, Sky National's social media team realized they had a crisis. Their mentions were flooded with angry comments, their Facebook page was being bombed with one-star reviews, and the hashtag SkyNationalRacism was trending #1 nationally. The overnight social media manager, a 26-year-old named Preston who had been hired 6 months earlier, stared at his screen in growing horror and immediately called his supervisor. Within 45 minutes, Sky National issued their first statement. We are aware of an incident that occurred this evening at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Sky National Airlines does not tolerate discrimination in any form. We are conducting a full investigation into this matter. We are committed to treating all passengers with dignity and respect. The statement was careful, corporate, and utterly inadequate. The internet tore it apart within minutes. You're conducting an investigation. We already conducted one. It's on video. You discriminated against a black family. Committed to dignity and respect. Where was that commitment at Gate D27? This is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern. We have receipts. Adelaide, sitting in a hotel room near the airport that she had booked for her family since returning home would have wasted hours they could not afford, watched the social media explosion with professional detachment. This was good. Public pressure would help. But public pressure alone would not create lasting change. She needed legal consequences, federal intervention, and systematic reform. At 7:45, her phone rang with a Washington, D.C. area code. She answered. Adelaide Thompson. The voice on the other end was distinguished, measured, and carried the weight of authority. Ms. Thompson, this is Senator Harrison Powell. I chair the Senate Committee on Civil Rights. I just watched a video of what happened to you and your family tonight, and I want to say on behalf of the committee that we are appalled. I also want you to know that we're adjusting tomorrow's hearing. Instead of you being one of several witnesses, you'll be the lead and primary focus. We're also issuing a subpoena tonight for Sky National's CEO and their head of operations to appear. What happened to you cannot stand. Adelaide closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself one moment of relief. Thank you, Senator. I'll be there. Even if I have to walk to Washington, I'll be there. Senator Powell's voice warmed slightly. I don't think that'll be necessary. We're arranging military transport for you and your family. A car will pick you up at 0600 hours and take you to Dobbins Air Reserve Base. You'll fly to Andrews on a government aircraft and be in the capital by 0830. That gives you 30 minutes to prepare before we start. Tears threatened for the first time that evening, but Adelaide blinked them back. Senator, that's incredibly generous. Ms. Thompson, it's the least we can do. What Sky National did to you was unconscionable. But more than that, what they did was stupid. They gave you the most powerful piece of evidence you could possibly have. They proved your case for you. We'll see you tomorrow morning. The call ended. Adelaide sat on the hotel bed, Bernard beside her with his arm around her shoulders, their children asleep in the adjoining room, and she allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in years. Not just anger at injustice or determination to fight. But hope. Real, genuine hope that this time, finally, the system might actually work the way it was supposed to. Adelaide Thompson did not sleep that night. She sat at the hotel desk with her laptop open, 3 coffee cups growing cold beside her, and worked with the focused intensity that had made her one of the most feared civil rights attorneys in the Southeast. Iris had sent over the complete testimony file, every document organized and cross-referenced. But Adelaide kept coming back to one question that nagged at her legal mind. Why? Why would gate agents at a major airline risk their careers to deny boarding to a random family? Even accounting for racism, which was depressingly common, this felt different. This felt targeted. At 1:47 in the morning, her phone pinged with an email from an address she did not recognize. The subject line read simply, "You need to see this." Adelaide's finger hovered over the delete button. Anonymous emails were usually spam or threats. But something made her open it. The message contained no text, just an attachment. She scanned it with antivirus software first, confirmed it was clean, then opened the file. It was a PDF containing internal Sky National documents, screenshots of email conversations, and what appeared to be scheduling records. Adelaide began reading. Her eyes grew wider with each page. Then her hands started shaking. Not with fear. With fury so intense it threatened to overwhelm her legendary self-control. The documents showed email conversations between Geneva Walsh and 3 executives in Sky National's corporate office, dated from 2 weeks earlier. The subject line was, "Problem Passenger Alert." The emails discussed Adelaide Thompson by name, noting that she was scheduled to fly to Washington on the evening of May 14 for the purpose of testifying before Congress about airline discrimination. One executive, a senior vice president named Frederick Clayton, had written, "We need to ensure this testimony does not proceed as planned. If Thompson is delayed or prevented from attending, the hearing loses its primary witness and likely gets postponed. Our legal team is confident we can delay indefinitely if we break their momentum now." Geneva Walsh had responded, "Understood. We'll handle personally." Will document passenger as security risk. If she objects or causes scene, even better. Makes her look unstable and discredits testimony. The conspiracy was right there in black and white. This was not random discrimination by biased employees. This was a coordinated effort by airline executives to obstruct a federal proceeding by preventing a witness from testifying. Adelaide's legal mind catalogued the charges even as her hands trembled with rage. Conspiracy to obstruct justice. Witness intimidation. Violation of federal transportation law. Civil rights violations. And that was just the beginning. The anonymous email had included more than just the conspiracy. There were records showing that Garrett Mitchell, the gate agent, had 7 formal complaints filed against him for racial discrimination in the past 18 months. Every single one had been dismissed by Sky National's HR department without investigation. One complaint came from a black doctor who had been denied boarding and missed his father's funeral. Another from a black family returning from Disney World with small children. A third from a black businesswoman who had been publicly accused of ticket fraud despite having paid full price for first class. The pattern was undeniable and horrifying. There were also performance reviews for Geneva Walsh showing she had been promoted 3 times in 5 years despite multiple complaints about discriminatory behavior. Her supervisor had written in one review, Geneva understands the importance of maintaining appropriate passenger demographics on premium routes. She exercises good judgment in passenger selection. Adelaide read that line 5 times, each reading making her angrier. Maintaining appropriate passenger demographics was corporate speak for keeping black people out of first class and business class seats. It was redlining at 30,000 feet. But the most damning document was a training memo distributed to gate agents 6 months earlier. The memo, written by the same Frederick Clayton who had conspired to block Adelaide's flight, outlined a passenger screening protocol that included criteria for identifying high-risk passengers. The criteria included passengers who purchase tickets with short booking windows, passengers traveling in groups of 3 or more, passengers who request seat changes or upgrades, and passengers whose names are flagged in our monitoring system. The memo never explicitly mentioned race. It did not have to. The criteria were designed to disproportionately target black travelers while maintaining plausible deniability. Short booking windows. Black families often could not afford to book far in advance. Groups of 3 or more. Black families traveling together. Seat changes and upgrades. Black passengers trying to access the same premium services as white passengers. And the monitoring system? That was where individual prejudice could be encoded as corporate policy. Adelaide forwarded everything to Iris immediately with a single-line message. Send this to the FBI, the DOJ Civil Rights Division, and Senator Powell. Do it now. Then she called the number on the anonymous email. A man answered on the 3rd ring, his voice hushed and nervous. I was wondering if you'd call. Adelaide kept her voice low to avoid waking Bernard and the children in the next room. Who are you and why are you sending me internal Sky National documents? The man hesitated. My name is Roberto Vasquez. I'm one of the security officers who was at Gate D27 tonight. I've worked airport security for 6 years, and what I saw tonight made me sick. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't speak up because I was afraid of losing my job. Then I got home and I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing your kids' faces. So I called a friend who works in Sky National's corporate IT. He's the one who pulled these documents. We both know we're probably going to get fired for this, but we also know we can't stay silent anymore. Adelaide felt her throat tighten. Roberto, what you've given me is evidence of criminal conspiracy. This goes way beyond discrimination. They tried to obstruct a federal proceeding. If you're willing to testify about what you witnessed and how you obtained this information, you could be a protected whistleblower under federal law. Roberto's voice strengthened. I'll testify. I'll do whatever you need. My father came to this country from El Salvador to escape violence and build a better life. He taught me that staying silent in the face of injustice makes you complicit. I've been complicit for too long. Adelaide spent the next hour on the phone with Roberto, documenting his account of the evening, his observations of the conspiracy, and his willingness to cooperate with federal investigators. When the call ended at 3:20 in the morning, Adelaide had transformed from a victim of discrimination into something far more dangerous to Sky National Airlines. She was now a prosecutor with ironclad evidence, a cooperative witness, and a platform to expose everything in front of the United States Senate in less than 6 hours. She updated her testimony, adding the new evidence and adjusting her presentation to include the conspiracy. She drafted a criminal referral to the Department of Justice. She prepared a motion for a temporary restraining order to preserve all Sky National documents related to the conspiracy. By the time the sky outside her hotel window began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, Adelaide Thompson had built a legal weapon capable of destroying careers, ending corporate policies, and potentially bringing down an entire airline. She allowed herself 1 hour of sleep, setting an alarm for 5 o'clock. When it buzzed, she woke feeling more energized than she had in months. Today was not just about testifying. Today was about justice. Real, concrete, undeniable justice. The black government sedan arrived at the hotel at precisely 6 o'clock in the morning. A Marine sergeant in dress uniform held the door as the Thompson family climbed inside. Aaron and Ada, who had been woken at 5:30 and told they were flying on a military plane, were wide-eyed with exhausted excitement. Bernard sat quietly, his hand never leaving Adelaide's. He knew his wife well enough to recognize the look on her face. This was not nervousness or fear. This was the look she got before delivering a closing argument she knew would change everything. The drive to Dobbins Air Reserve Base took 43 minutes through early morning Atlanta traffic. They were escorted through security with military efficiency and led to a waiting C-37B, the military version of a Gulfstream V. A young Air Force captain greeted them. "Ms. Thompson, your family will be in Washington in 90 minutes. We'll have you at the Capitol by 08:45. Coffee and breakfast are available on board." The flight was smooth and surreal. Adelaide reviewed her notes one final time while Ada watched the sunrise from 38,000 feet and Aaron peppered the Air Force crew with questions about aviation. They landed at Joint Base Andrews at 8:32 Eastern Time. Another government vehicle waited on the tarmac. Bernard squeezed Adelaide's hand as she gathered her briefcase. "Go make history," he whispered. The kids hugged her tight. Aaron said, "Make them pay for what they did, Mom." Ada just said, "We love you." The drive to the Capitol took 13 minutes with motorcycle escort. Adelaide walked into the Senate Hart Building at 8:51, 9 minutes before the hearing was scheduled to begin. Senator Powell met her in the hallway outside the hearing room. He was a tall man in his late 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Ms. Thompson. I'm glad you made it. I received the documents you sent overnight. My legal team has been reviewing them since 4 o'clock this morning. I want you to know that we're not just investigating Sky National anymore. The Department of Justice opened a criminal probe at 0600 hours. The FBI is executing search warrants at Sky National corporate headquarters right now." Adelaide felt a surge of fierce satisfaction. "Good. They earned every bit of it." Senator Powell smiled grimly. "They certainly did. Now let's go show the country exactly what they've done." The hearing room was packed beyond capacity. Every seat was filled with reporters, advocates, Sky National employees who had been subpoenaed, and members of the public who had been waiting since dawn to witness what they knew would be historic. Cameras from C-SPAN, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and a dozen other networks lined the back wall. Adelaide took her seat at the witness table. To her right sat Roberto Vasquez, who had flown to Washington overnight and would testify about the conspiracy he had helped expose. To her left sat 3 other passengers who had experienced similar discrimination from Sky National. Behind them, in seats reserved for parties with direct interest, sat Geneva Walsh and Garrett Mitchell. Both had been subpoenaed to appear. Both looked like they wished they could be anywhere else on earth. Senator Powell gavelled the hearing to order at precisely 9 o'clock. Good morning. This hearing of the Senate Committee on Civil Rights will come to order. We are here to examine systematic racial discrimination in the American airline industry, with specific focus on Sky National Airlines. But before we hear from our scheduled witnesses, I want to address an incident that occurred approximately 16 hours ago at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. He described the events at Gate D27 in detail, his voice growing harder with each sentence. Then he played Helen's video on the large screens mounted throughout the hearing room. The room watched in silence as the footage showed the Thompson family being denied boarding while white passengers streamed past them. Several senators shook their heads. A few looked genuinely angry. When the video ended, Senator Powell turned to Adelaide. Ms. Thompson, you are an attorney specializing in civil rights law. You have spent 2 years investigating Sky National Airlines for discriminatory practices. And last night, less than 24 hours before you were scheduled to testify before this committee, you yourself became a victim of exactly the discrimination you were coming here to expose. Please tell us in your own words what happened. Adelaide began speaking. Her voice was calm, professional, devastating in its precision. She walked through the timeline, noting each instance of disparate treatment, each violation of policy and law, each moment of humiliation inflicted on her family. She described her children's faces. She described the other passengers' reactions. She described the systematic nature of what had occurred. Then she dropped the bomb. Senator, what happened to my family last night was not an isolated incident of bias by individual employees. It was a coordinated conspiracy directed by Sky National corporate executives to prevent me from testifying before this committee. The room erupted. Reporters began typing frantically. Senators leaned forward. Adelaide continued speaking over the noise. Last night I received internal Sky National documents from a whistleblower. These documents, which have been provided to this committee, to the FBI, and to the Department of Justice, show email communications between Gate Supervisor Geneva Walsh and 3 corporate executives, including Senior Vice President Frederick Clayton. The emails explicitly discuss preventing my testimony by ensuring I missed my flight. They refer to me by name. They outline a plan to flag me as a security risk in order to justify denial of boarding. And they express confidence that delaying my testimony would allow Sky National to avoid federal scrutiny. She pulled out printed copies of the emails and held them up for the cameras. This is not just discrimination. This is obstruction of justice. This is witness intimidation. This is a criminal conspiracy to interfere with a congressional proceeding. Senator Powell looked at Geneva Walsh, who had gone pale and rigid in her seat. Ms. Walsh, you are under oath. Did you participate in a plan to prevent Ms. Thompson from boarding her flight in order to obstruct her testimony? Geneva's attorney, a nervous-looking man who had been hired that morning, leaned over to whisper to her. She shook her head. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The room exploded again. Senator Powell gavelled for order. Let the record show that the witness has invoked her Fifth Amendment rights. He turned to Garrett Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, same question. Were you aware that Ms. Thompson was scheduled to testify before this committee when you denied her boarding? Garrett looked at his own attorney, swallowed hard, and said in a barely audible voice, Yes, sir. My supervisor told me we had a problem passenger who needed to be delayed at all costs. His attorney grabbed his arm, but it was too late. The confession was on the record. Adelaide felt a wave of vindication so powerful it was almost physical. They had admitted it. On camera, under oath, in front of Congress and the nation. They had admitted to a criminal conspiracy. Senator Powell called on his colleagues for questions. Senator Naomi Chen from California went first. Ms. Thompson, you've documented that black passengers are denied boarding at 3 times the rate of white passengers on Sky National flights. Can you explain how this happens from a systemic standpoint? Adelaide had been preparing for this question for 2 years. Senator, the discrimination is encoded into seemingly neutral policies. For example, Sky National uses an algorithm to identify high-risk passengers who receive additional screening. The algorithm weighs factors like booking timeline, group size, and fare class. On the surface, these seem race-neutral. In practice, they disproportionately flag black passengers because of historical economic disparities and cultural differences in how families travel. Once flagged, passengers face additional hurdles that increase the likelihood of denied boarding. The system appears neutral but produces racially disparate outcomes by design. Senator Chen nodded. So Sky National can claim they're not discriminating while the results show clear discrimination. Adelaide smiled coldly. Exactly. It's systemic racism with plausible deniability. But the emails we obtained last night remove that deniability. They show corporate executives knowingly using these systems to target specific passengers based on race and to interfere with federal proceedings. The questioning continued for 2 hours. Adelaide presented statistical analyses, witness testimonies, and internal documents that painted a picture of an airline that had systematically marginalized black passengers while enriching itself on their revenue. She showed that black passengers who complained about discrimination were more likely to be banned from future flights. She demonstrated that black employees who reported bias were more likely to be terminated. She proved that the discrimination extended from passenger service to hiring to promotion to corporate culture. It was a comprehensive evisceration of Sky National Airlines, delivered with legal precision and backed by irrefutable evidence. At 11:15, Senator Powell called for a brief recess. As Adelaide stood to stretch, she glanced back at Geneva Walsh and Garrett Mitchell. Both looked destroyed. Their careers were over. Criminal charges were likely. Civil lawsuits were certain. And all of it had been captured on national television. Adelaide felt no sympathy. They had earned every consequence coming their way. The hearing resumed at 11:30 with testimony from Sky National's CEO, Frederick Hamilton. He had not been prepared for any of this. His company's legal team had thought this would be a routine oversight hearing. Instead, he walked into a buzzsaw. Senator Powell did not waste time with pleasantries. Mr. Hamilton, you are the Chief Executive Officer of Sky National Airlines. Are you familiar with your company's passenger screening protocols? Hamilton, a 68-year-old white man who had run the airline for 12 years, adjusted his reading glasses nervously. Senator, we have comprehensive security protocols designed to ensure passenger safety while complying with all federal regulations. That's not what I asked. Are you familiar with the specific protocols that resulted in Ms. Thompson being denied boarding last night? Hamilton hesitated. I became aware of the incident this morning. I want to state clearly that Sky National does not condone discrimination in any form. What happened to Ms. Thompson and her family does not reflect our values. Senator Chen cut in sharply. Mr. Hamilton, we have internal documents showing that your senior vice president, Frederick Clayton, coordinated with gate staff to deliberately prevent Ms. Thompson from boarding. Mr. Clayton reports directly to you. Are you telling this committee you were unaware of a conspiracy to obstruct congressional testimony being carried out by your own executives? Hamilton's face flushed. Senator, I was not aware of any such conspiracy. If those allegations are proven true, the individuals involved will face appropriate consequences. Senator Chen leaned forward. Mr. Clayton is sitting 3 rows behind you right now. Why don't you turn around and ask him if it's true? The room went silent. Hamilton slowly turned in his seat. Frederick Clayton, a thin man in his early 50s with receding hair and wire-rimmed glasses, stared straight ahead and said nothing. Hamilton turned back to the committee. Senator, I think it would be inappropriate for me to interrogate my employees during a congressional hearing. Senator Powell's voice turned icy. What's inappropriate, Mr. Hamilton, is that you've allowed a culture of systemic racism to flourish at your airline while accepting tens of millions in compensation. What's inappropriate is that 7 complaints about racial discrimination by a single gate agent were ignored by your HR department. What's inappropriate is that you promoted a supervisor with a documented history of bias while she was using her position to target black passengers. Don't lecture this committee about what's appropriate. The rebuke landed like a physical blow. Hamilton had no response. He sat in silence while senators from both parties took turns dismantling his defenses, his excuses, and his denials. By the time the hearing adjourned at 1:45 in the afternoon, Sky National Airlines had been thoroughly exposed before the nation. But more importantly, the mechanisms of systemic racism had been laid bare for everyone to see. The aftermath moved with shocking speed. Within 12 hours of Adelaide's testimony, the Department of Justice announced a full criminal investigation into Sky National Airlines for conspiracy to obstruct justice, witness tampering, and systematic civil rights violations. The FBI executed search warrants at Sky National's corporate headquarters in Dallas, seizing servers, emails, and internal communications. Federal agents interviewed dozens of employees, many of whom provided testimony about the discriminatory culture they had witnessed or participated in. By the end of the first week, 3 senior executives including Frederick Clayton had been placed on administrative leave. Geneva Walsh and Garrett Mitchell were terminated immediately and escorted from airline property by security. But they were far from the only casualties. The investigation revealed that 12 other gate agents and 7 supervisors at airports across the country had similar patterns of discriminatory behavior in their records. All were suspended pending investigation. 19 were ultimately terminated. 4 faced criminal charges for their role in the conspiracy to block Adelaide's testimony. The evidence kept mounting. Whistleblowers emerged from inside the company, emboldened by Roberto Vasquez's example and protected by federal whistleblower statutes. They brought forward more internal documents, more emails, more training materials that encoded racial bias into corporate policy. One particularly damning revelation came from a data analyst who had been tracking passenger complaints. She revealed that Sky National's customer service department had been instructed to flag complaints from black passengers as low priority, and to offer them minimal compensation compared to white passengers with identical issues. The analyst had questioned this policy and been told it was necessary to manage costs, because black passengers were less profitable as a customer demographic. When she persisted in objecting, she was reassigned to a lower position and ultimately laid off in what the company claimed was a routine restructuring. Adelaide added her to the growing list of plaintiffs in what was rapidly becoming one of the largest civil rights class action lawsuits in airline industry history. By the end of the second week, 347 former Sky National passengers had joined the lawsuit, representing incidents spanning 6 years. The stories were harrowing in their similarity and their impact. A black orthopedic surgeon had been pulled off a flight and accused of ticket fraud despite having platinum status and a confirmed first-class seat, missing a critical surgery as a result. A black family returning from their daughter's funeral had been denied boarding because a gate agent claimed their demeanor was threatening, forcing them to sleep in the airport overnight. A black graduate student traveling to defend her dissertation had been subjected to invasive additional screening that made her miss her connection, delaying her graduation by a semester. A black military officer in uniform had been asked to prove he had authorization to fly first class, a humiliation he endured in front of civilian passengers he had sworn to protect. Story after story, each one a small violence, each one an exercise of arbitrary power against people whose only offense was existing while black. The cumulative weight of the evidence was crushing. This was not about individual bias or isolated incidents. This was about a corporate culture that had systematically devalued black lives, black dignity, and black humanity in service of profit and prejudice. The financial markets responded swiftly. Sky National's stock price dropped 42% in 10 trading days. Credit rating agencies downgraded the company's debt to junk status. Major corporate clients began canceling their travel contracts. 3 banks withdrew lines of credit, citing reputational risk and legal liability exposure. The Department of Transportation took unprecedented action, suspending Sky National's authority to operate international flights pending completion of a comprehensive civil rights audit. The suspension affected 53 routes and cost the airline an estimated $18 million per day in lost revenue. Union pressure mounted from within as black employees, joined by allies of all races, demanded wholesale changes to hiring, promotion, and disciplinary practices. The pilots' union issued a statement saying, "We cannot in good conscience operate flights for an airline that treats passengers and employees with such systematic contempt." Flight attendants staged a coordinated sick-out that grounded 30% of the fleet for 3 days. The pressure became unsustainable. On the 16th day after Adelaide's testimony, Sky National's board of directors held an emergency meeting. At 7 o'clock that evening, they announced that CEO Frederick Hamilton was retiring effective immediately. The official statement cited health concerns, but everyone understood the truth. He was being forced out to save the company. But it was too little, too late. The class action lawsuit proceeded to settlement negotiations. Adelaide, representing the plaintiff class, demanded not just monetary compensation but structural reform. She insisted on the creation of an independent civil rights compliance office with authority to investigate complaints and terminate employees, including executives. She demanded mandatory bias training for all employees, conducted by outside experts rather than corporate HR. She required the implementation of transparent data reporting on passenger complaints, denials of boarding, and security screenings, broken down by race, to be published quarterly and audited annually. She demanded the purging of the algorithmic screening system that had been designed to flag black passengers, replaced with protocols that had been vetted by civil rights experts. And she insisted on $800 million in compensatory and punitive damages to be distributed among the class members. Sky National's attorneys argued the company could not survive such terms. Adelaide's response was cold and final. Then perhaps Sky National should not survive. You built this company on the degradation of black passengers. If acknowledging that truth and making it right destroys you, that is justice, not tragedy. The negotiations lasted 6 weeks. In the end, Sky National agreed to every structural reform Adelaide demanded and paid $780 million in damages. It was the largest civil rights settlement in airline history. But even that was not enough to save the company. The combination of legal costs, lost revenue, regulatory penalties, and destroyed reputation proved fatal. Sky National filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection 4 months after Adelaide's testimony. Its assets were purchased by a consortium of investors led by Diane Morrison, a black aviation entrepreneur who had built a successful regional airline and had long dreamed of transforming the industry. She renamed the company Horizon Airways and made Adelaide Thompson a member of the board of directors. The first policy Diane implemented was a zero-tolerance standard for discrimination. The second was a passenger bill of rights that gave travelers clear recourse when mistreated. The third was a commitment to hiring and promoting based on merit without regard to race, with transparent metrics to ensure accountability. Within 18 months, Horizon Airways had rebuilt the routes, restored customer confidence, and became profitable. More importantly, it became a model for what an airline could be when it treated all passengers with genuine dignity. Other airlines took notice. Fearing similar federal scrutiny and customer backlash, Delta, United, and American all implemented new civil rights compliance programs. The industry began to change, slowly and imperfectly, but undeniably. Adelaide Thompson became a national figure, appearing on news programs and speaking at conferences about systemic racism and corporate accountability. She published a book titled The Price of Dignity, that became a bestseller and required reading in business schools and law schools across the country. But the recognition she valued most came from the families she had represented. They sent her letters, photos, stories of flying without fear for the first time, of being treated with respect, of feeling like they belonged in spaces that had previously excluded them. One letter came from Aaron, her own son, 3 years after that night at Gate D27. He was preparing to start college at Harvard and wrote, "Mom, I used to think that night was the worst thing that ever happened to our family. Now I understand it was the beginning of the most important thing you ever did. You taught me that when the system fails you, you don't accept it. You fix the system. I'm going to spend my life doing the same thing." Adelaide kept that letter on her desk, a reminder of why the fight mattered and what victory truly looked like. Not just punishment for wrongdoing, but transformation of the structures that allowed the wrongdoing to occur. Not just compensation for harm, but prevention of future harm. Not just justice for herself, but justice for everyone who came after. 6 months after the settlement, Adelaide received a package at her office with no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten letter. Her assistant brought it to her with a concerned expression. "Should we call security?" Adelaide examined the package carefully. The postmark was local. The handwriting was neat and controlled. Something about it did not feel threatening. "Let me see what it is first." She plugged the USB drive into an isolated computer not connected to the firm's network, a precaution she had learned after years of handling sensitive cases. The drive contained a single audio file. She clicked play. Geneva Walsh's voice filled the office, recorded with crystal clarity. "Thompson flies today. She's testifying against us tomorrow." Garrett Mitchell responded, "What do we do?" Geneva's answer was chilling in its casual certainty. "We make sure she doesn't get to Washington. Find any reason to deny boarding. If she objects, call security. The more she protests, the more she looks like a troublemaker. The hearing loses credibility." Garrett sounded hesitant. "What if there are consequences?" Geneva laughed, a sound devoid of humor or humanity. "Corporate will protect us. They always do. We're just enforcing policy." Adelaide's hands began to shake as she listened. This was not just discrimination. This was premeditated conspiracy, captured in the conspirator's own words, eliminating any possibility of deniability or excuse. The recording continued with more damning details. Geneva discussed how to manipulate the computer system to flag Adelaide's reservation. She outlined the script to use with security officers. She even mentioned specific talking points to justify the denial if questioned by media. It was a comprehensive blueprint for obstruction of justice, carried out by mid-level employees who believed they were untouchable because the corporation would shield them. When the audio ended, Adelaide opened the letter. It was from Roberto Vasquez. "Ms. Thompson, I told you I would testify about what I witnessed that night. But there's something I didn't tell you because I was ashamed. I was wearing a body camera that night. It's standard equipment for security personnel at our airport. I recorded the entire interaction at Gate D27, including conversations between Geneva and Garrett that happened before you arrived. I heard them planning it. I knew it was wrong. And I did nothing to stop it. I've been carrying that guilt for 6 months. I'm sending you this recording now because the criminal trial is about to begin, and I want to make sure justice is fully served. I'm also sending copies to the U.S. Attorney and to the judge. I hope this helps ensure that everyone responsible for what happened to your family faces appropriate consequences. I'm sorry I didn't do this sooner." Adelaide sat in silence for a long moment, processing what she had just heard. Then she picked up the phone and called the U.S. Attorney handling the criminal case against Geneva Walsh, Frederick Clayton, and the other Sky National executives. "I just received new evidence you need to hear immediately." The recording changed everything. Geneva and the executives had been preparing to argue that their actions, while perhaps misguided, had not risen to the level of criminal conspiracy. They planned to claim that denying Adelaide boarding was a judgment call about security, not a deliberate plan to obstruct congressional testimony. The audio recording destroyed that defense. It proved premeditation. It proved coordination. It proved corrupt intent. When the U.S. attorney played the recording in court 3 weeks later, the defendant's lawyers requested an immediate recess. Within 2 hours, they returned with a plea offer. Geneva Walsh pled guilty to conspiracy to obstruct a congressional proceeding and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. She received a sentence of 12 years in federal prison. Garrett Mitchell, who had played a lesser role and showed genuine remorse, pled guilty to the same charges and received 4 years. Frederick Clayton and 2 other executives, who had orchestrated the conspiracy from corporate headquarters, received sentences ranging from 6 to 9 years each. The judge, a black woman named Justice Patricia Hendricks, delivered a statement at sentencing that Adelaide would remember for the rest of her life. The defendants in this case believed they could use their positions of power to silence a voice that threatened their interests. They believed they could degrade and humiliate a family without consequences. They believed the system would protect them because it always had before. They were wrong on every count. Ms. Thompson and her family showed extraordinary courage in the face of injustice. They refused to be silenced. They refused to accept discrimination as inevitable. They stood up not just for themselves but for hundreds of other passengers who had been similarly mistreated. Because of their courage and determination, a system that protected bias and punished victims has been dismantled. Because of their willingness to fight, other families will travel with dignity they would have been denied. The sentences imposed today reflect the seriousness of the crimes committed. But more than punishment, I hope these sentences send a message that no one, regardless of their position or power, is above the law or beyond accountability when they violate the civil rights of others. 1 year after that night at Gate D27, Adelaide stood in the same spot where her family had been denied boarding. The airport had installed a bronze plaque on the wall near the gate. It read, "Dedicated to those who fought for equal treatment in the skies." May we never forget that justice requires courage, persistence, and the refusal to accept injustice as normal. In honor of the Thompson family and all who have stood against discrimination. Aaron and Ada stood beside their mother, both taller now, both changed by the experience in ways that would shape the rest of their lives. Ada, who had cried that night in confusion and fear, now spoke regularly at her school about civil rights and standing up for others. Aaron, who had asked why they were being treated like criminals, was writing a memoir about the experience that would later help him gain admission to Harvard with a full scholarship. Bernard wrapped his arm around Adelaide's shoulders. "How does it feel to be back here?" Adelaide looked at the plaque, then at the stream of passengers moving through the terminal without fear or harassment, passengers of every race and background being treated with equal dignity because the system had been forced to change. "It feels like the fight was worth it. Every moment of humiliation, every hour of work, every sacrifice our family made. It was worth it because things are different now. Not perfect, but different. Better." A young black mother with 2 small children walked past them toward a gate. She was relaxed, laughing at something her daughter said, carrying business-class boarding passes without any apparent concern that she would be questioned or stopped or humiliated. She represented everything Adelaide had fought for. The right to travel without fear. The right to exist in public spaces without being presumed criminal or suspicious. The right to dignity that required no justification or explanation. Aaron noticed his mother watching the family. "That could have been us, if things were different." Adelaide shook her head. "No, baby. That is us. That's who we would have been if this had never happened. But we're something different now. We're the people who made sure what happened to us doesn't keep happening to others. We're the ones who broke the system that needed breaking." Bernard smiled. "And they picked the wrong family to mess with." Adelaide laughed, the first truly light-hearted laugh she had managed in months. "They really did. They saw a black family and assumed we would be easy targets. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They didn't know I had spent 2 years documenting their crimes. They didn't know I had the resources and knowledge to fight back. They didn't know I would never, ever give up until justice was done. They picked the wrong one. As they walked back through the terminal toward the exit, Adelaide reflected on the journey from victim to victor, from powerless to powerful, from silence to heard. The road had been exhausting and painful and filled with moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing. But she had never seriously considered surrender because too many people were counting on her, and because she knew that injustice unpunished would only grow bolder. The fight had cost her sleep, energy, and months of her life. But it had won dignity, accountability, and systemic change. It had transformed an airline industry and sent a message that reverberated far beyond aviation. No corporation was too big to be held accountable. No conspiracy too clever to be exposed. No discrimination too normalized to be challenged. Justice was possible when people refused to accept injustice. That was the lesson Adelaide would carry forward into every case, every fight, every moment when someone needed a champion who would not back down. And it was the lesson she had taught her children, who would carry it into their own futures and pass it on to the next generation. As they stepped out into the warm Georgia sunshine, Ada asked, "Mom, do you think they learned their lesson?" Adelaide considered the question seriously. Some of them did. Some never will. But that's not why we fight. We fight because it's right. We fight because silence is complicity. We fight because our dignity is not negotiable and our rights are not optional. And we fight because when we win, we don't just change our own lives. We change the world. Now I want to hear from you. Has this story changed how you think about standing up against injustice, even when it seems easier to stay quiet? Have you or someone you know experienced discrimination that went unchallenged because fighting back felt too hard or too risky? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If Adelaide's courage inspired you, hit that like button and let us know. Subscribe to this channel because we're committed to sharing stories that matter, stories about real people fighting real injustice and winning against impossible odds. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today, someone who might be facing their own fight and needs to know that victory is possible. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for believing that we can build a world where dignity and justice are not privileges but rights guaranteed to every person regardless of race. Until next time, stay strong, stay courageous, and never stop fighting for what's right. Adelaide Thompson's experience reveals fundamental truths about confronting systemic injustice in America. First, documentation is power. By recording the discriminatory treatment, Adelaide transformed the he-said-she-said dispute into irrefutable evidence that exposed corporate conspiracy. Second, expertise matters profoundly when fighting institutional racism. Adelaide's legal knowledge allowed her to recognize patterns, preserve evidence, and build an airtight case that destroyed the airline's defenses. Third, courage multiplies when individuals refuse to stay silent. Roberto's whistleblowing and Helen's public testimony created a chain reaction that emboldened hundreds of others to come forward with their own stories. Fourth, systemic change requires attacking not just individual actors but the structures enabling discrimination. Adelaide demanded policy reforms, independent oversight, and transparent accountability measures that prevented future abuse rather than simply punishing past offenses. Fifth, privileged allies amplifying marginalized voices accelerate justice significantly. Helen's willingness to use her credibility as a white witness gave Adelaide's claims immediate legitimacy that sadly should not have been necessary but proved strategically vital. Finally, corporations respect only two forces: legal liability and public pressure. The combination of federal investigation and viral condemnation forced changes that years of quiet complaints never achieved. Justice demands persistence, strategic thinking, coalition building, and absolute refusal to accept degradation as normal or inevitable. What would you have done in Adelaide's position when faced with blatant discrimination threatening your life's most important work? Would you have stayed silent to avoid confrontation, or would you have fought back knowing the personal cost might be enormous? Comment below and share your honest thoughts about when staying silent becomes complicity. If this story opened your eyes to how racism operates through seemingly neutral policies and procedures, hit that like button to help spread awareness. Subscribe to our channel because we're committed to bringing you powerful true stories about ordinary people achieving extraordinary justice against systems designed to defeat them. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that one person standing up can dismantle institutional racism and create change affecting millions. Thank you for investing your time in this important story, for caring about justice beyond your immediate experience, and for believing that dignity is a right belonging to every human being. May you find courage when injustice confronts you, allies when you need support, and victory when you refuse to surrender. Until our next story, stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and never underestimate your power to change the world.